perturbadores. Por eso mismo, si hay algún animador turbio que se te ocurra y que no aparezca aquí, te recomiendo dejarlo en los comentarios para una posible segunda parte. Espero en diciembre. Ahora, anticipo que este video está hecho de manera en que puedas solo ponerlo de audio de fondo sin necesidad de mirarlo, para que lo escuches mientras juegas en la Play o haces tus trabajos. Aún así, tendrá edición dinámica para aquellos otros que ven estos videos mientras comen. Así es, siempre piensen ustedes. Sin más demora, este es el iceberg de animadores raros, trágicos y perturbadores.
Nivel 1. Guión en Baskets.
Es un escritor, historietista y, lo que nos importa, animador, conocido por haber creado Invasor Sim, caricatura de Nickelodeon que contaba con un humor muy negro y ácido, tanto que muchos capítulos fueron cancelados o censurados por hacer referencias a cosas como la pérdida de... Aunque esto no debería sorprendernos, ya que antes de trabajar para Nickelodeon, este había creado un cómic llamado Johnny el homicida maníaco, un cómic que obviamente nos habla de un pastelero alegre.
Felix Culgrey.
Es un cineasta australiano polifacético que ha animado varios videos musicales como Feberte Ghost y creado cortos de tendencia surrealista con una alta crítica social. Pero si está aquí es porque sus cortos más antiguos mezclaban los mensajes que quería entregar con una alta cantidad de gore.
Jack Staber.
Es un extravagante animador de internet que ha colaborado con grandes empresas como Adult Swim y que suele mezclar animación 2D, Play Animation, 3D y efectos de edición de video para crear animaciones como mínimo fascinantes, aunque su popularidad es más debida a sus composiciones musicales como...
Mid Kenyon.
Es un famoso animador y caricaturista reconocido por hacer parodias a youtubers, caricaturas, películas y otras cosas. Su estilo es bastante burdo y grotesco, pero muchos lo ubicarán por ser el creador de
Lee Hardcastle.
Es un animador de stop motion que hace clay animation, o sea, que anima con plastilina. Sus cortos, que se pueden encontrar en YouTube, suelen tomar franquicias conocidas y ponerlas en situaciones de extrema violencia con alto uso del gore. Destaco su corto de los Simpsons, de Simpson Coach God, el cual es un corto en el que la familia Simpson pasa una situación en la que se enfrenta a unos vándalos de forma muy sangrienta y violenta.
Julia Bott.
Es la creadora de la serie Summer Camp Island de Cartoon Network. Aunque en esa serie no se ve nada raro, no se puede decir lo mismo de sus otros trabajos que se pueden encontrar en YouTube, donde tras una fachada inocente se esconden animaciones con trasfondos inquietantes, en las que algunos personajes llegan a ser desmembrados.
Mike Kinell.
Es un animador conocido por haber recreado escenas de Zootopia, El increíble mundo de Gumball y Gravity Falls en estilo anime. También posee una vasta cantidad de trabajos NFSW, lo que no sería raro si no tuviera un par donde podemos ver que los gemelos Dipper y Mabel se acercan de una manera muy adulta.
Brad Bird.
Es un director de cine estadounidense conocido principalmente por dirigir películas animadas como Los Increíbles 2 y El Gigante de Hierro. Con respecto a esta última, él confesó que decidió dirigirla tras la violenta muerte de su hermana, la cual fue ultimada a disparos por su esposo. En sus palabras:
mi hermana Susan, a quien amo mucho y era muy cercana, murió a causa de la violencia con arma y fuego. Fue asesinada por su esposo. Yo estaba devastado. Cuando le disparas a alguien, no solo estás matando a esa persona, estás matando una parte de todas las personas que la aman. La idea que le presenté a Warner Bros. Después de leer el libro, cuando dije que realmente me gustaba pero que quería hacer algo diferente con él, fue: ¿y si un arma tuviera alma?
Butch Hartman.
Es un veterano animador famoso por ser el creador de Los Padrinos Mágicos, Danny Phantom y Puff Puppy. Sin embargo, en los últimos años ha cultivado una mala fama producto de pequeñas controversias acumuladas, como vender comisiones de $200 que en realidad eran calcadas, el intento de creación de una plataforma de streaming de animación con el financiamiento de sus fans, pero que en realidad esta tenía una secreta agenda cristiana que Butch lo ocultaba a sus donantes. Todo esto ha provocado que sea poco recomendado trabajar con él a pesar de su maestría en la animación. Una lástima.
Yatabe Katsuyoshi.
Es un director de animación japonesa conocido por haber dirigido el anime infantil Dino Rey, pero también por haber dirigido otras varias animaciones para adultos, entre ellas el clásico de los troleos de los Nains, Boku no Pico.
Paul Boy.
Fue un animador canadiense que trabajó en Ed, Edd y Eddy. De hecho, fue responsable de dirigir la intro de la serie. Este padecía de un trastorno bipolar que lamentablemente lo llevó en 2007 a generar un escándalo público que fue atendido por la policía de manera fatal, pues decidieron detenerlo propinándole 9 disparos de advertencia, el último cuando ya estaba en el suelo. En YouTube te puedes encontrar un video del acontecimiento captado por un turista, y en su memoria, el capítulo final de la serie Look Before You, Ed, incluye una conmemorativa.
Nivel 2. Slapper y YouTube.
Es un artista NFSW que se dedica a hacer animaciones 3D de Minecraft y fue creador del famoso personaje Jenny del Jenny's Mod de Minecraft, un mod que añade un personaje femenino llamado Jenny a tu Minecraft con el que podrás interactuar de manera bastante cariñosa. Destaco que, aunque es su personaje, él no es el creador del mod.
Coin Minecraft Animation, Futuristic Hub.
Es un youtuber de Minecraft que en su momento llegó a realizar animaciones cómicas pero con escenas para adulto que subió a YouTube en aquellos antiguos días que YouTube moderaba con la polla.
Rebecca Sugar.
Es una famosa animadora y compositora conocida por ser la creadora de Steven Universe y por haber escrito y creado canciones geniales para Hora de Aventura. Está aquí porque hace mucho tiempo se filtró que en su juventud llegó a realizar yaoi de Ed, Edd y Eddy, además de un dibujo autoinsertivo donde era la esclava de Invasor Sim en un extraño y extenso fanfic de los típicos de Tumblr de aquellas eras.
Antunes.
Es un animador de YouTube estonio el cual es conocido por sus controversiales puntos de vista políticos conservadores que suele incluir en sus animaciones, donde se burla de feministas, lesbianas, personas de izquierda y la muerte trans.
Squeezy.
Fue una animadora y streamer de YouTube conocida por hacer varias animaciones memes que se volvieron hits inmediato teniendo millones de vistas, además de una carrera exitosa en la plataforma morada. Sin embargo, abandonó todas sus cuentas debido a un odio generalizado que sus ex-fans le tienen debido a una larga lista de acciones nefastas, participar de manera intelectual en la falsa funa de un youtuber por abuso sexual, lanzar insultos racistas en stream y en Discord, abusar física y psicológicamente de su exnovio, haciendo cosas como agarrarlo por el cuello para golpear su cabeza contra la pared, amenazarlo con un cuchillo, mentirle a su madre sobre que no tenían dinero para que ésta le pagara un boleto de avión de vuelta a su país en medio de la pandemia, mentirle a sus amigos sobre que él era el verdadero abusador, chantajearlo con el hecho de que si él contaba algo de las cosas que ella había hecho cuando eran pareja, ella ultimaría su propia vida, y otras mínimas cosas igual de nefastas.
Jake Goldman.
Es un escritor de reboot de 2016 de Las Chicas Superpoderosas transmitido por Cartoon Network. Está aquí porque en varios capítulos de dicho reboot se podía observar a un personaje que era una autoinserción infantilizada de su persona. Encima de eso, dentro de la serie se nos da a entender que la protagonista Bombón está perdidamente enamorada de dicho personaje, haciéndolo todo mucho más espeluznante. Sin embargo, después de la controversia, varios animadores salieron a decir que era una broma interna del cast de la serie y que lo habían hecho para molestarlo, ya que no le gustaba el personaje de Bombón. No cuajó, ya que dicha broma interna se prolongó por varios capítulos donde vemos que se repite este extraño y espeluznante comportamiento.
Justin Roiland.
Es un actor de voz, escritor y animador conocido por ser el creador de la serie para adultos Rick and Morty, serie en la que prestaba su voz al coprotagonista Rick Sánchez. Sin embargo, hoy en día se encuentra desligado de la producción de la serie debido a que en 2020 fue acusado de agresión doméstica por una expareja, aunque los cargos fueron desestimados en 2023 por falta de pruebas. Prontamente se le imputaron nuevos cargos por abuso sexual, además de que se filtraron conversaciones subidas de tono que él mantuvo con mujeres menores desde sus cuentas oficiales, donde usaba la típica frase de que eres muy madura para tu edad, entre otras muchas frases igual de desagradables.
Nivel 3. Birdie.
Birdie fue una animadora de YouTube cuyo momento de mayor apogeo fue por allá en 2020, cuando tenía 16 años. Esta se dedicaba a hacer memes animations y sketches cortos de su personaje principal. Sin embargo, por su inmadurez, se hizo infame por usar a este mismo personaje en cortos animados donde asesinaba a los original characters de gente que le caía mal, como por ejemplo su ex pareja. Además, se le vio participar en un server de Discord donde se pasaba contenido inapropiado acerca de animales, sin mencionar que ella misma mencionó en ese server querer mantener un acercamiento adulto con su mascota.
-8.
Es un reconocido artista surcoreano de NFSW que posee un estilo muy fácil de identificar y que de seguro lo habrás visto antes. Sus animaciones son muy dinámicas y creativas a pesar de usar la limitada técnica de marionetas en Flash, además de que suelen ser rítmicas, por lo que se hicieron muy populares gracias a los memes, como cierta animación de una gata egipcia que de seguro conocerás. Sin embargo, no está aquí por eso, sino por el hecho de que Nimus tiene una fijación con dibujar a menores en situaciones adultas. Sumado a eso, en el presente año 2023 se difundió una declaración que había realizado en Tumblr años atrás.
No lo niego, él está en lo correcto. He pintado con personaje infantil, es cierto. Para ser honesto, me imagino teniendo con un niño real. Quiero tocar y besar y ser tan un niño, pero al mismo tiempo tengo miedo de tomar la responsabilidad.
Hello everyone, it's time. After all these years, it's finally time to make a video on the terrifying world of animation. Now, if you follow my channel, you probably have figured out by now that I kind of like animation. And if you don't follow my channel, you can do that, you can subscribe. But throughout my time through animation, I've heard many times of people talking about how animation is just for children. And I want to let you know, if you know someone like that who believes that animation is just for children, send them this video. It's gonna change their mind. Oh, it's gonna. Over time throughout my channel, I have seen a few dark animated films and shows and other things, but I've never really delved down that rabbit hole until now. And let me tell you, this rabbit hole is definitely deep. With this video, I definitely wanted to focus on animated films or maybe animated shorts, but there's going to be a few maybe YouTube animations in here or just random animations that I found on the internet. And fair warning, obviously, there's going to be a good amount of gore. There's going to be a good amount of triggering things, especially when we reach the lower portions of this iceberg. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the iceberg videos, it's the basic concept of the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what everyone knows. The further we get down into the depths, that's the shit that is very obscure, a lot of times very depressing and dark. There will be 5 different tiers. A lot of these came from different icebergs that I saw on the internet, and a lot of these things I actually found myself with my research. Now, before we jump into this hellish landscape of animation, are you guys hungry? Well, what if I told you guys I had something here that could give you a quick meal without having to cook, but at the same time being just as nutritious and delicious as a homemade meal? I'm talking about Factor. Now, me personally, I've been using Factor for probably over a year, but Factor is the best solution to never frozen, quick meals that are extremely healthy for you. Maybe you want to make your gains, maybe you want to lose weight, or maybe just all around you just want to eat better, but you don't have the time to always be making those big meals. And on top of everything, they're dietitian approved, and you yourself get to choose the meals that you want. And say you have a specific diet, maybe you're on keto, maybe you want like a calorie smart diet, maybe you're vegan, maybe you're vegetarian. And not only healthy meals, they also have healthy snacks. That includes smoothies, juices, and other add-ons. And on top of all that I mentioned, it is of course cheaper than takeout. Factor has completely changed my life and saved me a buttload of time. So if you guys are looking for a quick and healthy, delicious meal, there really is no better way to go about it. So head to factor75.com or just click the link in the description and use code BionicPig50 to get 50% off your Factor box. Trust me, you won't regret it. So without further ado, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it.
It's a beautiful day. All is calm and peaceful in the meadow. Or is it? If you look closely, very closely.
Now, starting with Tier 1, we all know how this goes. This is kind of full of that surface layer, scary, disturbing animations that you've at least heard about once in your life. They're disturbing, sure, but, they're passable enough to make it into the public eye. A very talked about and well-known of these is Watership Down, for a good example. Now, I'm sure if you've never seen this movie, you've at least heard of this movie. And in the worst case scenario, you saw this movie when you were a child expecting it to be Bambi, and it wasn't. The story revolves around a group of rabbits who embark on a perilous journey to find a new home after their warren is threatened by destruction. In the film, a rabbit named Fiver has a prophetic vision of impending doom that prompts him and his brother Hazel to warn their fellow rabbits about the impending disaster. However, the warren's chief rabbit dismisses their warnings. Fiver and Hazel decide to gather a group of rabbits willing to follow them in the search of a safer location. And what proceeds in this film is just pure, brutal world of just survival. It's basically Discovery Channel on steroids. The movie really delves into the complexities of animal behavior and the parallel between rabbit struggles and the human experience. I feel like the reason this movie has become so infamous is the fact that a lot of children, or at least I should say parents, believed it to be a not adult scary movie. I feel like this is one of the first movies that really rang true that, hey, animation ain't just for little kids anymore. Next, let's talk about YouTube animations. We got David Firth, we got Lee Hardcastle, that entire group of YouTube animators that are very famously known for their horror animation. Firth, I feel, especially gained prominence with his internet animation series, Salad Fingers. That's definitely something that pretty much all of us has heard about once or twice. Now, my personal favorite when it comes to David Firth is obviously Cream. Lee Hardcastle might be a little bit more extreme than David Firth when it comes to the gore element. Now, that could just be because the whole stop-motion claymation idea, something about claymation truly just makes horror a lot worse. And not only that, but Lee Hardcastle's animations will go on to inspire many people, including someone who we are going to be mentioning later on in this video who's done unspeakable things. Make sure you stick around for Tier 5 to find out who. Obviously, we could put Meat Canyon on here, and there's plenty of other animators that do this type of horror thing on YouTube. Next, we have the classic Happy Tree Friend. Now, you know I can't have an animation iceberg without Happy Tree Friend. The one animation that we all saw when we were younger, and it scarred us. We shared it around in our little friend groups trying to freak each other out. Oh, dude, it's just a little cutesy animated video. Trust me, nothing bad happens. But Happy Tree Friends is an animated web series known for its deceptively cute characters who frequently find themselves in incredibly violent and gruesome situations. The juxtaposition of those cutesy, innocent visuals in combination with that extreme violence creates that darkly comedic and shocking graphic tone that we all know and love. Still to this day, people discover this animation for the first time and get fooled by that cutesy nature. And I just want to mention, throughout this entire video, that whole juxtaposition of those cute, innocent idea, and then it delves into horror and gore, that happens a lot. And I don't know why it's always animation that does it, but it does it well. And next, I wanted to put the most famous and well-known controversial animated movie of all time. Now, sure, this isn't all animation, but it is the fact that it was created by Song of the South. Now, the reason this one is so well known is the fact that it was created by the loving and beautiful Disney itself. This movie is set in the South, obviously, and it follows the story of a young boy named Johnny who visits his grandmother's plantation. There he befriends a man named Uncle Remus, an elderly African-American man who tells him imaginative stories featuring the animated characters Brother Rabbit, Brother Fox, and Brother Bear. The film has been criticized for the portrayal of that racial stereotype and its glossing over the harsh realities of the time period, slavery. Due to this film, it's actually been withheld from distribution, and Disney does everything in its power to make sure that no one can find this movie. Later on, Ralph Bakshi, who is someone we're going to be talking about later on in this video, he released a film called Skin that satirizes these 3 animated characters. And if you want to know a little bit more about Disney or a little bit more about the movie that I just mentioned, I made videos on both. The Disney iceberg is definitely one of the most deplorable ones I've ever made, if you're interested. And I guess with tier 1, we can just end on an open note. I feel like anyone and everyone can just throw in the comments section terrifying and graphic animations that they themselves know, and I'm sure a lot of other people know. I could obviously mention things like Coraline, Paranorman 9, other animated movies of that nature, so feel free to leave in the comments of things that you find extremely disturbing that are animated. But it's time to get a little bit deeper, a little bit more obscure. Now this animation I actually found on YouTube a while ago, but I honestly think it's one of the coolest animations, at least when it comes to horror character design. The animation is called Playground Trailer, which I hope that means that this is going to turn into an actual show or an actual movie, because holy shit, that would be amazing. But in this trailer, there are monsters that are so goddamn cool and absolutely horrific, and it just makes me so curious as to how they work and what they do. And in combination with the soundtrack and how these monsters move, it adds up to an incredible horror experience. And this is just the trailer. What I can gather, this is just that basic concept of a cute little playground, one that you would find in, say, a McDonald's. However, once you get inside that playground, it turns into a completely different universe full of different creatures, monsters, alien beings. It's like I said before, the juxtaposition of innocent children world meets horrific, terrible monsters. Kind of gives you that Little Nightmares feel with this trailer. Next, we have Cat Soup. Yeah, very interesting name for a movie. Cat Soup is a surreal and abstract animated short film that was released in 2001. The story follows a young cat named Nyata, who embarks on a strange and dreamlike journey to retrieve his sister Solin's soul from the land of the dead. Now, this film is known for its unconventional narrative, the visual symbolism, and of course the absence of dialogue. There's a lot of movies in here that do have absence of dialogue, which I really do tend to like in animated movies because it makes people really pay attention to the actual visuals. But this movie definitely relies heavily on surrealism and disturbing imagery. The main character, Nyata, navigates through a world that blurs the lines between life and death, reality and illusion. The film explores themes of morality, the cyclical nature of existence, and the human experience. Again, that combination of innocence and cutesiness with terrifying and horror. There are a lot of moments in this movie that definitely make you feel extremely unsettled, uncomfortable, and just weird. It's not like general gore. It's more about the idea of bodies being warped in ways that just don't make natural sense and really leave you with that sense of unease. It really focuses, obviously, on existentialism, which really leaves you thinking at the end of this short. Next, we have one that is more controversial than disturbing, because it has to do with Beavis and Butthead. Yeah, Beavis and Butthead is a show that I'm sure you've probably heard of if you're above the age of 20. It was a raunchy show with two main characters getting into ridiculous situations, and normally they themselves end up being the butt of the joke. Especially when it comes to a show above the age. Normally they themselves end up being the butt of the joke. Especially when it comes to this episode that was actually banned throughout the world. It went a little bit too far, and it was called Heroes. See, in this episode we see Beavis and Butthead sitting down watching TV. They see a show with like guns and they're like, damn, guns are cool. And then they see a commercial selling guns. And they themselves decide to go to that gun shop and buy a gun. And this is where it gets pretty bad. They end up accidentally shooting down an entire plane. Now, I'm sure you could already see why this is a banned episode, but it actually gets a little bit worse. After they shoot down the plane, they kind of just look at each other and laugh about it and say, wow, that was cool. You know, classic and Beavis Butthead stuff. I mean, they do something really, really bad and then laugh about it. That's kind of just what they do. But the thing that really pushed it over the edge is when they were just toying with the people whose lives are on the line inside that plane. a lady asking them to open the door so they can escape, they have two pregnant women, and then they end up looking at each other and laughing again. Later that day at their house, there was a breaking news report about the plane, and it came on blaming everything on the youth of America. They used a picture of Beavis and Butthead, talked about how they mocked everyone on the plane, and then left, and then the end of it was just blaming the youth of America. Now sure, this is just a short 10-minute episode, but me personally, I'm kind of confused on what the joke actually was, or I should say what the message was. At first I thought it was just that idea of how easy it is for someone to just go get a gun, so someone as stupid as Beavis and Butthead can just walk in and buy a gun. But then when it ended with that whole youth thing, I'm not really sure what this episode was trying to display. And especially in the time of like terrorism and, you know, hijacking planes and planes crashing, and I don't know, it just was not a good time or was not a good joke at all. The episode obviously has been banned, but this is again another controversial one, not really a disturbing one, but still interesting all the same as to why or how they did this. It was from a show called Tiny Toons Adventures. It was an episode titled One Beer. Now this generated controversy due to its portrayal of alcohol consumption and its potential influence on young viewers. Now this episode, which originally aired in 1991, depicts the main characters, who are obviously junior versions of the main Looney Tunes characters, experimenting with drinking beer. The characters engage in reckless behavior and become intoxicated, leading to a series of dangerous and inappropriate actions. Now, the thing I don't get about this is obviously they were trying to show that message of beer is bad, but they went about it in the most unsafe, awful way possible, because it was just way too on the nose. They could have talked about peer pressure, or they could have talked about a beer but used a different type of drink that wasn't beer, you know, if that makes sense. And at one point, they were even meta about the whole situation, because at one point, Bug says to one of his friends that this episode is about the evils of alcohol, and then he proceeds to turn into like a devil, like horns coming out of his head, rubbing his hands together. Like I said, a very on-the-nose, poorly portrayed way of saying, hey, alcohol's bad, especially since they went on to drink said alcohol and be intoxicated. Next, we have a show called Made in Abyss. Now, maybe a lot of you have heard about this show, but I feel like this show is definitely overshadowed and underrated. I remember watching the first season, but the only reason this show is not that popular as it should be is the fact that it keeps bouncing around between different streaming services. And honestly, it's pretty hard to find out where it is half the time. I think originally it was on Shudder, which not many people use, and then it went to Amazon. Amazon Prime, and then it went to a completely weird streaming service. I completely forget what it was called, but not a normal one. But anyway, this is an anime series. The story is set in a mysterious world where there's a massive chasm called the Abyss, and the Abyss is the subject of exploration and fascination. The Abyss is divided into different sections, each layer as you go down, each with its own unique alien environment, where you learn the rules of each level along with the main character. The more and more you go down, the more and more each level defies the laws of physics. The story follows a character named Riko, a young girl whose mother, a legendary cave raider, disappeared into the Abyss. One day, Riko discovers a robot boy named Reg, who has lost his memory, but he possesses extraordinary power. Determined to learn more about her mother's fate, Riko embarks on a dangerous journey into that abyss with Reg. As they descend deeper and deeper into the abyss's layers, they encounter bizarre creatures, stunning landscapes, and uncover dark secrets hidden within the realm. This series really balances that sense of wonder and that looming sense of danger. The themes in here are about exploration, sacrifice, friendship, and the cost of curiosity. But that's not what really makes this show interesting. On the surface, obviously, looks campy. Two little kids, one overpowered character going down into these crazy, wacky worlds. Well, yeah, you're wrong. You're wrong. This show definitely lulls you into that false sense of security. Beautiful world, beautiful animation, and our main characters are children. Why would anything bad happen, right? But boy, this show does not pull its punches. Once you find out more and more secrets about the Abyss and meet people who dive into the Abyss, you truly see the deplority of humanity and the things people will do in order to discover the Abyss's secrets. You start learning how these monsters came to be. You start understanding their backstory and the absolute disgusting way that they were made. The experiments being done and what truly is down there. It really takes that statement of, if you find yourself staring too long into the Abyss, you will see the Abyss stare back. And boy, does that Abyss stare back. It stares back good. I would highly recommend this show. Sure, it gets pretty rough to watch at times, I will admit, but it's a good show. Next, we have another anime. Yes, anime does tend to have some pretty, fucked up things in it. Death Parade. Now, this one I put on here for myself, because this is something I watched, and I don't really feel like many people have watched this show. And I feel like a lot of what people expect when it comes to disturbing animation, or what I'm going to be talking about on this iceberg, is just pure gore, blood, viscera. Which, don't get me wrong, the more we go down, the more bloody and viscera it gets, but there's a lot more to horror than just gore. Death Parade is just disturbing. It's a show I saw a while back, but it still sticks with me ever since. It's an anime series that delves into the afterlife, exploring those complex themes of morality, judgment, and human nature. The story takes place in a mysterious bar, and it's called the Quindecium. And this is where souls of the deceased arrive to be judged. They're judged whether or not they go into the good place or the bad place. They don't necessarily call it heaven or hell, but that's that basic concept. The bartender, Decium, oversees a unique game that forces these souls to confront their true selves as they make decisions under pressure. And don't get me wrong, there is a fair share of gore in this show, but as the souls compete in these games, their memories, their emotions are gradually revealed. You learn their backstories, how they died, why they died, what life they led, leading to profound insights about life in general. Decium's assistant, Chiyuki, is a special case. She came to this world, but she's the only one who's maintained her memories from life. And she kind of sticks around for a while and helps the bartender understand the human experience more deeply. Because in this world, they've done the same thing every single time. They do a game that is very complexly made in order for people to show their true self. But she starts to show that humans aren't that simple. They're a lot more complex than meets the eye. A simple judging of right and wrong is not something that can be done with a simple game. This series focuses on ethical dilemmas faced by souls and the consequences of their decisions. It raises those thought-provoking questions about the nature of humanity. There's moments of forgiveness, redemption, and the concept of life and death. There are so many moments in this show that I had to just take a break after an episode. I had to just take a break and go pace for a while to just think about life. I would recommend, if you ever watch this show, make sure that you are in a good mental state, because there's a lot of existentialism, a lot of talk about life and death, and it will really mess with you. And regardless of how disturbing this show can get, you are left with kind of a good feeling at the end. Highly recommend this show. Next, we have Persepolis. Now, this one is controversial because it has a lot to do with politics, as this displays the harsh true story of the Iranian government. Persepolis is an animated film adaptation of a graphic novel of the same name, and it tells the autobiographical story of the author's upbringing in Iran during and after the Islamic Revolution. This film portrays her experiences growing up under a repressive regime, her family's struggles, her curiosity about the world, and her eventual journey to Europe to escape the political turmoil in her homeland. Now, I feel like this film really just puts life into perspective and how lucky some of us truly are, because sometimes we do
the old cartoons are simply a product of their time, but my god, like, it's insane to think how normalized racism was back in the 1940s, and it's still an ongoing battle today. But looking back on stuff like this makes you realize just how blatant people were with it. Even crazier than the fact that this short exists is the attempts to get this short banned. It was originally released in 1941 and re-released in 1948. This prompted the NAACP to write Universal a letter outlining the blatant racism and, as they put it, vicious caricature of black life in the South, citing that it depicted black people as lazy and only activated by swing music. And to be completely honest, I don't see how you could watch this cartoon and think anything different. 9 days after receiving this letter, Universal responded with one of the most insane responses, where they detailed how no theater had received complaints about the film. Gee, I wonder why. And for those that are wondering why no theaters would have complaints about this, it's probably because people back then felt scared to talk back about this. Like, imagine going as a black person going up to like a white cashier or like a white manager and trying to complain about this to them. Like, I can't imagine being in that position. So of course no theaters would have complained about this. And to be honest, I don't even know what they played this film at, but I can't imagine it would have been in black communities. It probably would have been in a lot of white communities who probably would have accepted the film. So that as an argument is already pretty bad. But anyways, a few days later, the NAACP got into contact with Universal's sales distribution chief, E.L. McAvoy, or I might be mispronouncing it, but this guy defended the cartoon's blatant racism. I'll repeat that again. This guy actually defended the blatant racist imagery riddled within this cartoon. And eventually this would end with Universal announcing that the studio was withdrawing the film, and you would think that would be the end of it, but it's not. The cartoonist who made this short was Walter Lantz. And I don't know if this guy is trolling or if he's playing dumb on purpose, but he was supposedly shocked that people thought that this cartoon had any racist themes in it. Apparently he thought that what he made was not racist in the slightest. And I already said this a little bit before, but I don't know how you can watch this cartoon and not see how horrible it must feel for your culture to be depicted in such a manner. Thankfully, Lance did end up making an effort in his future cartoons to exclude any type of offensive caricatures of any racial or ethnic groups. So props to him for making the change, but I feel like that's just the bare minimum when making stuff like that. But regardless, he was also a major reason as to why Scrub Me Mama was pulled. He supposedly was a huge advocate for wanting the distribution of the cartoon to cease. So we might have Lance to thank for that. But yeah, it's crazy that this cartoon even existed. And for those who are curious to see any of the cartoons on this list, not just Scrub Me Mama, but most of these can be found on YouTube, Dailymotion, Vimeo, or just the general internet. You can just look them up on Google, just type in the title or whatever. I used to put them in the comment section or in the description, but I've since decided to just not do that, just because, not because it's a lot of work, but because I don't feel comfortable spreading that kind of stuff. If I do see enough people wanting me to put that stuff in the description, I'll be more than happy to do it. But I just remember feeling weird about the whole situation. I always feel weird when I upload stuff like this. But anyways, I just wanted to say that really quickly. Let's go on to the next one. Quarantined Crab. This episode of SpongeBob centers around the usual gang whose peace is disrupted when a familiar face shows up. If you're a longtime SpongeBob enjoyer, then you should recognize the health inspector from the Nasty Patty episode. He makes a reappearance in this episode as the health inspector, only this time he has a device that scans for illnesses and diseases. He determines that the Krusty Krab is infested with something called the crab flu and puts the restaurant under immediate quarantine. Now Mr. Krabs tries to subside everyone's fear by explaining that if they find out anyone is infected, they'll simply throw them in the freezer, because that's what him and his crew on his boat used to do back when they had the same exact illness. They would just simply throw people in the freezer and kind of forget about them until it was time for them to come out of their quarantine. Then the rest of the episode is this gag where basically every single person that's in the store besides Mr. Krabs shows a sliver of a symptom, like sneezing or something, and then Mr. Krabs freaks out and he's like, the freezer, and he sends everyone into the freezer one by one, leading to everyone that's in the freezer revolting against Mr. Krabs, because now all of a sudden they think Mr. Krabs is the one that's sick. Fight between all the characters happens, and then it's interrupted by the health inspector, who explains that he made a mistake and the clam flu was not actually in the Krusty Krab. The episode was pulled from the air all the way up until April of 2022 for the obvious parallels to the real world problem of the COVID-19 pandemic. The episode served almost a 2-year ban from the internet, only being available on Amazon Prime and iTunes in 2022, and then coming back to Paramount Plus in 2023. What doesn't make sense to me is that the episode was made in 2020, right? This is when the pandemic was, in my opinion, at its highest peak interest. And even after the fact, even years, even now, it's not like the pandemic is really over or COVID went away. The problem just kind of stopped being talked about. My point is, why even make the episode in the first place if you knew for a fact that it might not be a good idea for it to be on the air? I guess the thought process here was that Nickelodeon was hesitant to expose children to the reality of the situation that most of us were living in, because, again, to be honest, this was basically happening everywhere at least in the US. I can only relate with my own personal experience, right? But I imagine everywhere in the world, shutdowns of restaurants and businesses were happening every other day. At least that's how it was where I was living at. And it's weird to release this episode, but whatever the case, it did eventually